Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Venture Fuel Visionaries podcast. I'm your host, Fred Schonenberg. I'm so excited to welcome to today's show. We have Chris Jones. Chris is the Senior Director at NASDA Foundation, which is the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. Chris is the driving force behind the Farm2Food Accelerator, which is a 15-week training program built to empower and educate small-scale farmers and food entrepreneurs to become more resilient through food production. The program focuses on helping small-scale farmers, food entrepreneurs use their current agricultural production or locally sourced production to develop a packaged value-add food or beverage product. Today, we're going to talk about the value of innovation and entrepreneurship, the future of food and agriculture, and how the program launches the next generation of businesses right from the farm. So please join me in welcoming Chris Jones. Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Fred, for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Farm2Food Accelerator and how it differs from other programs that are out there?
Sure. So the Farm2Food Accelerator was started with a specialty crop block grant with the Washington and Oregon State Departments of Agriculture about 6 or 7 years ago. And we worked with them in order to develop and enhance that food production aspect earlier in the cycle, working with the producers directly in order to build that resilient food system and that value add that could really help with the resiliency of their product line and the market volatility, the potential for market volatility. And so really that was the impetus to start this. And when we really started to look at this, it centered around the idea of how do we focus earlier in the supply chain with the farmers, but then also incorporate food safety. What does it mean to have a food safe product that can go to market? And some of the farmers were already at farmers markets or smaller stores. Yeah. How could we continue to grow products that were saleable both in those locations, but then also into regional or even national grocery chains? And so that's where we started to focus in a little bit more. And our partners between the Washington and Oregon State Departments of Ag, and then the build out with the work from Union Kitchen in the Washington, D.C. area, as well as the Oregon State Food Incubation Center or Food Innovation Center, really worked through helping us develop that curriculum that could withstand really be evergreen and withstand any kind of changes in the marketplace. And right now we are conducting 3 cohorts, one in Nevada with the Nevada Department of Agriculture, one in Colorado through the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and then one in Virginia with the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services.
Very interesting. Can you elaborate a little bit on the specific resources and support that an early stage founder would receive through one of these programs?
Sure. And I think let me start with this as well. It's not just the resources that they receive, but that difference that we do have is earlier in the food supply chain and earlier in the marketplace. So we have to think about the resources that the producers would need accordingly. And you think about the funding and the investment that a farmer may need in order to venture into a value-add production system compared to a straight food entrepreneur or a consumer packaged good company that may have some profitability that they can layer in. And so really where we start is at that state-specific food safety level. And I say that very specifically because every state will have slightly different needs and requirements when it comes to foods. There's a baseline of food safety that's needed, but every state implements that or has specific regulations and licensing and things like that. So we start at that state level. And the way I always say it is if you know one state, you know one state. Because Connecticut will differ from Georgia, will differ from California, and you have to understand that. So we start at that very specific level for these cohorts and for the producers. We then go into bringing industry experts that the producers may not typically have access to. that could be whether it be industry, academia, Department of Agriculture, or what have you, where they can really ask the questions and get detailed answers that can help specifically build what they need for success. And then we also look at very specific resources, and we develop these over time. So what the cohorts had 5 years ago was built upon over the last 5 to 6 years in order to enhance the work that they're doing. So the HR toolkit or the marketing toolkit, we continue to look at how we're growing, and all previous cohorts have access to that information. So we now have costing and marketing models that are very specific to various stages of product development. We have specific resources that look at locality and regionality. How do we adapt the program to the specific needs of that area? And that includes even running programs in Spanish over the last few years. So we have resources and materials that we can go specifically into language justice and language cohort areas based on what the needs are within that state and within the program as well.
Chris, for anyone that's listening that maybe is trying to wrap their head around like the full process, can you talk about maybe start at the end, like what is the success story and where did it begin? Just because I'm thinking about all different types of food safety, I'm thinking different agricultural products. Curious if you have maybe like an example that'll kind of bring the process or the dream state of this to life.
Sure. So you think about a producer, right? A farmer that is working with specialty crops. Again, that's where we're focused, is that specialty crop area. Think about someone that may produce basil, and they are very successful with their production. They're at farmers markets. They're selling it to consumers straight away. We all know that there are plants or parts of that crop that are left over, whether it be slightly lesser grade, less pretty, but the taste is there. And in order to reduce food waste, in order to do a lot of these things and provide income stream as well, there's that opportunity for them to really look at, well, let's produce a basil product. We're going to work with local nut producers and local oil vendors and everything else to bring a local product to market. At the same time, you have to look at shelf life, food safety, all of these things in order to bring a packaged product to the shelf, not just at a grocery store, but at your local food co-op or at a farmer's market. And so that's where we had them start with. We have our cohort members start with the end in mind. What's that vision? What's that dream that you have? What's the product that what's the supply? What's the ingredient that you want to work with? Okay, how do we work on the formulation? How do we work on the packaging? What does plastic versus glass look like? How does the label go on there? The nutrition information. What is a UPC? How do you register for a UPC? We go soup to nuts in all of those areas. And that's where our program really does differentiate from others that may focus more on how do we market? How do we sell? We want to take a step back and say, how do you put something together that is great tasting, food safe? And we've seen some of our cohort members go on to have very successful small businesses. Some have started local grocery stores. Some have actually gone into research with other grant programs. So the gamut is wide in terms of the success that we've seen.
Yeah, it's crazy interesting. I love the sort of like the upcycling idea or the ways to use different pieces and of whatever the product might be. How do you find the applicants? I would imagine that there's that's both easy in some ways and very difficult in others.
I mean, first, our partners are key in this, whether it be the departments of agriculture. We work very specifically with those teams to say, are there groups of producers that who's typically out there. So we talk to them, but then we also look at regional and local partners to say, are there other, maybe it's venture capitalists, or maybe it's local food co-ops that say, here are some great producers that are trying to break into this. We may talk to farmers markets and farmer market managers and say, who is in need there? But one of the biggest advocates for our program are the former cohort members themselves. We found, based on our research, that 90% of our cohort members would actually recommend the program to their peers. And so when we've done the program in Nevada the last few years, for instance, I would say a good 6 to 8 of our current cohort members that just started their program yesterday actually had a reference from a previous cohort member. So that word of mouth is critical, especially in farming communities where farmers will trust each other and they'll trust folks in their local communities as well as the Department of Ag. So those are very important areas. But I would also say that we try to recruit as much as possible in that area, but also you think about the food entrepreneurship metrics. And so you think about the farmers markets or the local co-ops where we can really say who's in that early stage as far as the food entrepreneurs. And sometimes that may be working with another accelerator type program where somebody may say, we're not an expert in food safety, but we know that NASDA Foundation and their Farm2Food Accelerator can do that. So we try to network with other accelerators because at the end of the day, we all have very similar goals to see people succeed. But not everyone's going to have the same skill set, because if they did, then it would be easy to do. And we know that venture like this is not always easy to take on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned goals, and I would love to pick your brain a little bit on that. How do you measure the success or the goals for these entrepreneurs, knowing that they're at different stages and maybe different crops involved? And how do you kind of gauge whether they are successful and or a certain cohort is successful?
So you start to think about goals. It's hard to say it's always a firm ROI number, right? I have a background in CPG and grocery retail. It was always, if you're going to invest this amount of time or this amount of dollar, what's your return, right? That hard ROI number. Here we have to be a little bit less firm, but we look both quantitatively and qualitatively. And so we look at things like the growth of knowledge, and that can differ from person to person. We look at who has actually developed maybe it's food safety plans or increased their knowledge in certain areas. We look at the engagement that individuals have with very specific statewide systems. Maybe that's licensing or other activities that they've done. So we ask our members via surveys what some of these outcomes are, and we work to summarize a lot of that together. Now, at the same time, we look to see are there potential sales, and understanding what that sales number looks like for any one producer may be different because of where they are and what success looks like for them. Sometimes it's purely, we want to break even, but we want to reduce food waste. So we're happy to just break even with what we're doing and things. But I would say, too, that we outline very specifically as we develop these cohort models, and we're working with the Departments of Agriculture, we very specifically do put some quantitative measures in place, but each state is going to differ a little bit. But all of those are synergistic with the goals of NASDA and NASDA Foundation overall, given the work that we do with the Food Safety Modernization Act, our policy priorities, and such. So we're really linking all those elements together in order to produce a good outcome and what we would term successful. I will say too, sometimes when you have the hard metrics, you don't always hit them 100%. That's okay. And I don't say that from the standpoint of we want to not succeed, quote unquote succeed, but there are learning opportunities, right? If someone's facing significant drought or significant rain and flooding, that's going to impact what's produced. So we may have to adjust on the fly and pivot. And if you are too rigid in your program and don't have that flexibility to work with farmers, then your program doesn't fit what farmers need at the time.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Is there, you have three programs happening now. You've run several of these. Are there any commonalities in terms of challenges that you see founders facing, and how does the program help address any one of those that you'd like to talk about?
So that's one of the things that we do at the end of every program, right? It's always, what were the barriers that you came in with? What have you faced? And we started to understand that timing of running the program was critical. And that's why we run the programs when we do. We always start our applications in the July, August timeframe. We close them in late September, and we kick off before the Thanksgiving holiday in November, because we know that November, December, January, February are typically, I'll say, slower months of the year for many producers. So that was a challenge and a barrier that we were able to address very easily in just the way we set things up. And so we've constantly been learning. But when you think about who we're trying to impact at the end of the day with these producers, food systems are complex. I don't think anyone would say, oh, it's easy to get product from field all the way to consumers' plates, right? You have to think about the regulatory piece. That could be licensing. It could be inspections. And that's where NASDA and the state departments of agriculture and how we work together, right? We really work as co-regulators, and how we can think through the needs of the states and how we represent that up in Washington, D.C., and D.C. back out to the states with all the different agencies. So we can help with that the regulatory piece. Also costing. Many small producers don't always understand all the cost inputs. And so by putting costing models together, you can say, oh, to do strawberry varietal is this cost. To do chocolate, it's this. To do, right, boysenberry, it's this. And they may sit there and go, well, we get great feedback on boysenberry, but I'm losing $3 for every jar of jam that I put together.
Yeah.
Well, by having that cost model put together, they're able to say, well, if I'm able to reduce this, I actually will be able to invest more in these areas, expand, think about what the consumers need. And we actually had a producer do that last year, and she said it was the toughest decision, and my business is thriving. When I was able to say, I can fundamentally make the call to reduce my product line. But then it builds that efficiency for the producers as well, because as they're trying to get into commercial kitchen space or community kitchens and things, how can they make best use of their time in order to be effective? And we know that that's there. So I would say at the end of the day, we're really working to help entrepreneurs make the best decisions that they can, arming them with data, insights, tools, and resources in order to make those best decisions. Not everything's going to always be right or 100%, but we want to arm them with as much information as possible. And then that also helps prepare them for future conversations, whether that be with farmers market managers, it could be with the state for licensing, it could be with a retailer to grow into things. I mean, imagine a farmer that says 2 years ago, I was at a farmer's market. Now I'm being sourced in a regional grocery store with 200 stores in distribution. That's a phenomenal growth model, but they need information in order to get there. And then I would say the last thing is entrepreneurs face challenges in terms of funding. How can they start when they don't have that capital to build from? So is it outside sources? Is it grants? And having the training like this, where they're not having to pay $10,000 or $15,000 to do this training class, we're able to facilitate that for them. They can then invest some of those dollars to build that capital themselves and then launch.
Very cool. I love that. How do you see the accelerator evolving over time? Like what's your future vision for where this goes and how it evolves?
So our program continues to evolve, and I like that word evolve, right? It's never changing, it's just evolving based on the needs of what we're seeing, right? The food system overall is a very dynamic thing to work with. And I say it's a living, breathing creature in a lot of ways. And we have to listen to that feedback from producers, from the state departments of agriculture, because number one, the state departments of ag know their constituents best. And what's going on. What are folks in Nevada facing that folks in Maine aren't facing? And so we have to start to really listen to some of that. And sometimes there's tension, right? You may have two cohorts running and they're facing very different dynamics. And so there's some tension there, but there's some commonality as well. And so as we're continuing to evolve, 6 years ago, we didn't have costing models. But now we have good costing models to use. We didn't have HR toolkits. We didn't have e-commerce training guides. And we've continued to develop that. Nevada, for instance, this year, we'll actually have commercial kitchen space that the cohort members can use that we're helping to facilitate. So we're going to get some space for them to be able to do that. We're also bringing new resources and new partners into some of these states to say, in Colorado State, and they have a Spur campus in the Denver area. They want to be included in some of this, in that those are resources and labs that producers can contact the school in order to run testing or what have you. So we want to bring those resources to bear. So it's understanding who those partners can be. I would also say that it's not always just the beginning farmer or that early stage only. How can we start to look at what growth looks like in terms of grants, other programs? We were beginning to look at the RAP program through USDA, which is the Regional Agricultural Promotion Program, and look at what does trade and export look like? How can we help educate farmers where that's going? But then we're also always looking at opportunities to work with great partners, whether it be in the funding arena, or maybe it's needs that partners are saying, we really see a gap in this space. Okay, let's work together to figure out what that looks like. One example would be Nevada really wanted to focus in on women farmers. Well, 2026 is the year of the global or the international year of the women farmer. And we actually had a producer head over to Rome and speak with the food and ag office in Rome and talking about the production that they've done. So we're trying to address those needs that are coming up and work through communities and see where we can go.
I love it. Well, Chris, first, let me just say thank you for all you're doing to spark change. We love the program. I think that's incredible future and is obviously doing great work already. Where can people go to learn more and find out about the specifics of the program?
So there are a few different sites. Number one, you can go to our Farm2Food Accelerator website. It's farm2foodaccelerator.org. That will get you directly into this program. But then you can also go on to NASDA.org, which is our general webpage, which talks about our policy. But then you can also find all of our other programs, whether it be Farm2Food Accelerator, the work that we're doing with water quality, or even into the regional food business centers and things. So there's opportunity to learn a lot there as well. So farm2foodaccelerator.org, and then also NASDA.org would be the two sources.
That sounds great. Well, Chris, thank you for sharing all your insights, and look forward to sending all of our listeners there to learn more.
Sounds great. Thanks, Fred.